back to the Film Freaks podcast, the latest form of cinephile entertainment hosted by yours truly, Tyler from CaliCriticReviews, as me and a movie buff guest break down the latest weekend movies, whether it's the news, the trailers, and the recent releases to hit the theaters in the last weekend. Joining me today as the guest is one of my very good friends on YouTube. He's a reviewer like me, and he also runs a podcast of his own, the Movie Files podcast, hosted by him and his friend Charlie Morris from Not Charles Morris. That is Mr. Jordan Rowe of the Rowenet Review.
Hello. Thank you so much, Tyler, for having me on. Glad to be on. Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome, sir. And here on the Film Freaks podcast, we like to break down all the biggest things that have happened in the last week in the film industry. We start off with the Hollywood 3, which is the 3 biggest news stories to hit the web, whether it involves casting announcements, filming, and so forth. Then we move on to Trailer Talk, which we break down the latest trailers to release in the past week and give our thoughts on them. And then finally, we end with the core presentation of Rate the Release, which we review the latest movies to hit theaters in the last week, and that will be The Amazing Spider-Man and Savages. But to start off with the Hollywood 3, there's been a lot of Dark Knight Rises news lately. In fact, the movie comes out in almost a week and a half. And
finally.
And the hype has relentlessly been building up as of late. And the first 2 of our news stories actually deal with the Dark Knight Rises. The first one being which the runtime has been released, which is reportedly clocked out at 164 minutes and a few seconds and change. Now, I'm a big fan of this announcement, of course, because for a trilogy that has built up this much hype and has delivered consistently on both the movies in general, with both of them getting progressively better by the release, I feel like this is the best thing, because if you're going to close out a trilogy that's been as epic as this one, you really have to set the bar high and cram in as much as you can to a runtime like this to really get that epic feel. So I'm really digging this, of course, and the trailers, of course, are building up to that fact as well. What do you make of this?
I think if it were any other movie, I'd be like, oh god, it's almost 3 hours. But I think because it's The Dark Knight Rises, and pretty much all of Christopher Nolan's films post Batman Begins have been over 2 hours, and they're some of the quickest 2 to 2.5 hours I've ever seen.
I agree.
In a movie. And this movie, I feel like, will go down the same way. I think it makes sense that the last chapter is the longest, because I think Lord of the Rings did a similar thing, where each movie was a little bit longer than the last one.
3 hours, 3 hours, 3.5 hours.
Yeah, I think that it definitely makes sense. I feel like, again, with any other movie, I'd be like, oh great, because I am seeing this at midnight, and regardless, I will get home pretty late, but no, I'm definitely excited. I think this hopefully will give Christopher Nolan a really good amount of time for him to tell the story he wants. And I think this should be a great movie. And I guess we'll get into it a little bit more with the featurette in the next story. But this is definitely really cool, and I'm excited for the movie.
Yes, at least when you get home after the midnight show, and you'll be able to go right to sleep. As for me, I'll get like 3 hours, and I have to wake up to get my dog situated and everything.
Yeah.
So you have it easier than me for that right there. But moving on to our next Dark Knight Rises news story, which you hinted at, is a 13-minute featurette was released a few hours ago earlier today. We're recording this on Saturday, by the way, if you're wondering. Now, for a person like Christopher Nolan, whose all of his films hardly show anything most of the time in the trailers, they do show some money shots, but not really essentially the build-up to those in particular. And in this featurette, you get the making of all the main cast and crew sharing their thoughts on the movie, and Christopher Nolan as a director himself. It's a very informative, detailed, and very descriptive featurette, one of the best that I've seen without a doubt. And the best part about it is that it hardly gives away any of the big reveals or anything. Like, it essentially just leaves you on edge of what's going to happen, because it really shows all the same footage that you have seen, and I think they've done a really good job at just cutting to this together alone. Like, anything in editing that has involved in Dark Knight Rises has been amazing, but I really love the praise that the actors gave to Christopher Nolan in general, because I'll admit, granted, he is a very talented filmmaker. Like, he's only at the very edge of my top 10 list because I've had other directors influence me more. But nonetheless, I really love the admiration and kind words that these people have for him, because he really seems like one of the most committed and well-rounded filmmakers working today. And especially for the fact that we're stuck in this day and age of Hollywood where blockbusters haven't really been consistently entertaining on a scale, Christopher Nolan has done it with just about every single one he's made. And it just, once again, seems like he's not going to disappoint from this.
Yeah, no, this featurette was really cool. Like you were saying, I think Christopher Nolan, I mean, when you talk about summer blockbusters, I think there's nobody even remotely close to his level. I mean, he's he's fantastic when it comes to this type of movie. And in the featurette, he brought up some points, and there's some really cool insights to some scenes they did. For instance, there's one big fight that I guess we kind of get teased in the trailer, and they go into a little bit more here, where it's Bane's mercenaries versus Gotham's cops, and it's set in New York, and I guess I don't know if like the Wall Street building was a part of that. I think they briefly brought that up, but there was one sort of line that I think one of the producers said, where they explained how they had 8 months of planning just for this one scene, and I think that shows how much dedication Christopher Nolan has to this series, how much dedication, and how much he really wants to make the movie he wants to make. There's a lot of practical action scenes.
Yeah, even in that Wall Street scene too, because I think they mentioned they used at least 1,200 extras or so. All those people that you see running are real. It's
insane, yeah, and even when I heard about when The Dark Knight came out, there was practical action going on then. The big semi truck being flipped over was an actual semi truck being flipped over. Inception used a lot of practical effects. They actually built a rotating hallway for that fight scene. And in this movie, they exploded. There was even just like a brief kind of B-roll shot they had where is it? I don't think it's Batman's tumbler, but it's kind of like the war paint, the green kind of army green colors of on the tumbler.
Yes,
you just see it explode and go flying across the street, and they actually exploded it. The stadium scene where Bane's army kind of comes in, they really blew up the stadium for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it looks amazing. When you look at the set footage, you go, "Wow, this is what a real director, I think, is." It really shows kind of what a director truly committed to his movies really is. Also, that when they kind of talk about the prologue scene we saw before Mission Impossible, where it's Bane's army kind of going in from the airplane, they really shot that too.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't even believe that either.
Yeah, when I saw that scene, I was like, how did they do that? And they really shot it. They shot it from a helicopter. They had stunt people hanging off the side of the plane, and just that kind of stuff. Just the fact that Christopher Nolan actually went ahead and wanted to do that and actually committed and followed through on it. It's just fantastic. I can't wait for this movie. It's pretty much been talked to death at this point, but yeah, The Dark Knight Rises, it's less than 2 weeks away, and I just cannot wait.
Yeah, me neither. And thankfully, we have less than 2 weeks of waiting left now until the midnight showing premieres. I'll be going to the IMAX one, which I can't wait because I found out that they shot at least somewhere between 60 and 80% of this movie on IMAX cameras, which means that this movie's going to look glorious on that screen for sure.
It's going to be great.
Now we move on to our last story in the Hollywood 3, which this is without doubt the most interesting one, to say the least. And I can't believe I'm saying that, and I'm following up 2 news stories about The Dark Knight Rises. But this is dealing with director Michael Bay, which, granted, he doesn't really have a lot of fans today with the kind of movies that he makes, and especially with this very smug and cocky attitude that he's known to exhibit. However, this has been a recent bring-up in which Michael Bay used to be a music video director before he ended up making the transition to making feature movies, and someone brought up this very interesting thing in which he essentially sort of copied shots of David Fincher's music videos, and he translated them into ones that he did with Rockstar Meatloaf. And then he even took a shot that he ended up using a similar one in one of his early films, Bad Boys. And Michael Bay has been known to be a director that always tries to find the perfect shortcut when he's making certain movies. For instance, there was that part in Pearl Harbor where they have a pan over of an aircraft carrier on the sea. They used that same shot in Transformers. And then you had the highway crash sequence in The Island, which was used in a scene in Transformers 3. Right? And now we get up to this point, I pretty much think he's completed the trifecta of finding shortcuts in his work. And this essentially epitomizes all of them right here.
Yeah, it's funny that, when I saw this montage, I thought, wait, didn't I watch something very similar with another Michael Bay? And it was that side-by-side comparison of The Island, that crash side-by-side with the Transformers crash, and it's literally the same shot.
All that they did was insert an effect, and that was it.
Yeah. And this one, what I've heard is that I guess Michael Bay and David Fincher at some point worked at the same production company, but it almost makes me, because at the beginning of this video, it's sort of like, okay, maybe they didn't copy each other. But as the video goes on, it gets really, really similar in terms of what Michael Bay is doing. And it almost makes me think he thought, hey, these are some really cool shots. Let's just borrow a couple of them. I don't think anyone's going to notice. And, well,
they notice now.
So, yeah. And, of course, David Fincher's looks 10 times cooler than the Michael Bay ones. Like, the Michael Bay one, the one that made me laugh the most was the I forget what David Fincher it was, where you see the airplane fly over the Hollywood sign.
And then the Michael Bay one, it was flying over the Miami sign from the first Bad Boys.
The other direction. I just found that really funny. From Bad Boys. Yeah, this is really weird. Whenever I see stuff like this, I just find it pretty funny. And, yeah, I'm sure David Fincher initially was not happy, but now, I mean, who's really more respected?
Yeah, it makes me wonder whether Michael Bay was directly on set when Fincher was filming these scenes, or if he was just in the editing room or was one of the first people to get the screen of these works that Fincher was shown, that he ended up taking shots that he did. But, God, like, I don't know, this just makes me have even less respect than Michael Bay than I had before, because it just gradually drops every year or so because of something stupid that he does. And this just is going to furtherly dip that level down. And I think it could only increase since he's making a goddamn 4th Transformers movie. Like, any of us asked for that.
Yeah, if that 4th Transformers teaser trailer is cut the same way the girl with the dragon tattoo was with Immigrant Song, it's going to be, that'll be interesting.
You know what? Even though I wouldn't want to see that happen, I want to see that as a joke at least. Maybe College Humor can pull that off beforehand.
Yeah, let's get somebody on that. Let's have an editing contest for that. Yeah.
All right, well, that's it with the news stories in the Hollywood 3. Of course, you can find all the links to those in the description below. And now we move on to trailer talk, which, granted, this last week has been very slow on trailers. There haven't really been a lot of new ones released as of late, but the first one we have is Jack Reacher. This is an action thriller that stars Tom Cruise, and let's just call him Ryan Gosling 20 years later, but with brown hair, to say the least, because this movie is essentially a Drive knockoff, ripoff, however you want to see it. It's written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who, granted, the guy is a decent screenwriter. He wrote one of my favorite movies of all time, The Usual Suspects. But
it's a great movie.
Yes, but judging from this, I like Tom Cruise, but that's really the best I can give it, though.
Yeah, I didn't exactly know what to make of this trailer, and the Drive comparison is inevitable because all you see in this trailer is Tom Cruise, who doesn't speak any dialogue. He has voiceover, but he's not, like, speaking very many lines, driving in a car. And the plot sounded wildly different than Drive. I think I read the IMDb synopsis was something to the effect of they're trying to uncover a mystery of a sniper who killed 5 people, like, mysteriously. They kind of don't really know that. That's a really cool premise, but this trailer doesn't give any of that at all. And it honestly, I'm fine with great, teasers are some of the best trailers out there because they get you interested in the movie without giving anything away. With this movie, I just left confused. And
Same.
I'm kind of happy they didn't give anything away, but at the same time, I didn't exactly know what to make of it, even tonally. Because this is a Tom Cruise movie, and as of late, you had Mission Impossible, which is like a big tentpole action movie, and this is, made by the same studio and his production company, but tonally in the trailer, it looks like it could be something like Drive, but it is a wide release, so yeah, I don't exactly know what to make of it at this point. I'll look out for it. I'm definitely going to see it, but yeah, I think I'm pending. I need another trailer to get my opinion on it. So at the moment, it looks good, but that good as far as the trailer lets me think it.
Yeah, but if we see another trailer that does release, which is most likely imminent, given that this movie doesn't release until late December, I think, if I'm right. Maybe we just blame the guy who chopped together this trailer for making it too much like Drive. And if that's the case, and they release a new trailer in which tonally it is so much different and it really drives those, I'm using a pun here, but it drives those Drive comparisons downwards at least, then that guy needs to be fired immediately then.
I mean, regardless, this looks like it's an interesting role for Tom Cruise because from what I can tell from the trailer, it looks somewhat like an anti-hero role, which is, I guess, again, drawing those comparisons to Drive, but, it being a new Tom Cruise movie made by Paramount and Skydance Productions, it very well could be just a big tentpole action movie, so I don't exactly know. I'm intrigued, and I did like the kind of cool low-key spy music in the trailer. They kind of throw in at the end, so that maybe leads me to believe that it's more of a serious crime drama, but not exactly sure yet. Is it based off of a book? I feel like I heard it was.
I want to say that it is, but I'm not entirely sure on that, though.
Yeah, I thought I saw that it was, but I don't know. I'm definitely I'm intrigued, but I kind of need more.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that too. I'm intrigued because it is Tom Cruise, and I like Christopher McQuarrie as a writer, and he isn't that bad of a director either. Just I need another trailer, just more than this.
Yeah, I'm looking on IMDb right now. This was based off of a book.
All right,
so
that makes sense then.
Maybe they know a little bit better than us.
Yep. All right, so now we move on to our second trailer, in which the next two trailers are for movies that already had trailers released before, but they've had new ones come out as of recent because they're nearing closer to their release dates. The first one is this 1.5-minute trailer for the new film Lawless, which stars Tom Hardy, Shia LaBeouf, Gary Oldman, Jessica Chastain, Mia Wasikowska, and Guy Pearce, a very, very talented cast. And it's based on the true story of these brothers who did bootlegging in the Midwest and them clashing with the feds and the police and so forth. And the first trailer was alright. Like, it really sucked me into the environment, and the acting looks pretty good, but for some reason I cannot shake the fact that it did look like quite a Hollywoodized portrayal of the true story that it was based off of. Now, this trailer, though, doesn't really give much new footage, to say the least. It essentially kind of retreads a lot of the footage that you've already seen before, but nonetheless, the way it's cut together, and along with the acting, which looks very similar, and even from Shia LaBeouf, who looks like I'm not going to be annoyed by a performance of his for the first time in about 5 years or so, but I like the action from the way it's shot, and I like John Hillcoat as a director. He directed the adaptation of Cormac McCarthy's amazing novel, The Road, which is one of my all-time favorite books, and without doubt one of the most faithful book-to-screen adaptations that I've seen. It's a very, very underrated movie when it released, and check that out if you have, but I just can't see this being a die-hard awards contender by any means. In fact, I think it will just be set up as a movie for blockbuster entertainment, kind of from the way it looks like it's going to shape out. But what do you think of this new trailer?
I actually liked the first trailer a lot. I have heard that the movie was already screened at Cannes, and from what I heard, you're pretty much right in the sense that it's probably not an awards contender. I have heard it's very good, and the new trailer doesn't necessarily do that much different. It looks just like kind of a condensed version of the first trailer, but I think you get a little bit more of Guy Ritchie's character.
Guy Pearce.
Guy Pearce, my bad.
You should have had a British accent when saying that instead.
Yeah, there's, I guess, Guy's a common British first name. You get a bit more into his character. I'm assuming he's like the antagonist of the movie, and he looks like he's kind of just relishing this role, chewing up scenery. The cast, again, I mean, that's really is what's selling me here. And I think it looks like it's got a good sense of atmosphere. It looks kind of dirty and grainy, and it looks really good in that sense. I think the cinematography is really good. But I will be seeing the movie. I think it could be like a final summer movie that either you're right, it could be a kind of fun action movie, or it could be one of those cases where it's like this is sort of a halfway point between summer blockbuster and awards contender. It could be like a transition movie. You kind of get my drift.
Yeah, I do.
So yeah, no, I'm interested in this movie. I will be seeing it, but this new trailer is not doing a whole lot different.
Yeah, I know. It's literally like they just spliced out 1.5 minutes of footage from the first trailer, and then they just rearranged parts of it that you've seen before to make it look like they released something new, which is something that we have seen before from other added-on trailers based off of the first one. But nonetheless, I'm still looking forward to this. As you said, the acting does look very good, and the cinematography and scenery, I really like the look of the 1930s in it, which I think it's set in the 1930s. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you're right.
And I'm just really digging the look of it, in which they've really nailed down the time period. And John Hillcoat is a director that does a great job at nailing down settings, scenery, cinematography. He's a guy that works very well with that. And I still really want to see this other movie that he did called The Proposition, which I think also starred Guy Pearce. In fact, Guy Pearce has been in all 3 of his movies that he has made as features, which is a pretty interesting fact right there. But you're right. It could go either way. Like, it could be just a blockbuster entertainment movie to close the summer, or who knows, it could surprise and be something more than that. But No, it looks good, and as I said, I'll definitely be seeing it too.
Yep, definitely.
And now we move on to our last trailer, which is also a second trailer for a movie that already previously released one. And that is a new trailer to the DreamWorks animated movie Rise of the Guardians. And can't really say what the plot is in particular, other than the fact that it's this young boy named Jack Frost who has powers to freeze stuff and to manipulate snow and stuff, I guess, from the trailer. And he's called in by all these like childhood figures or something like that, like Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, who are voiced respectively by Isla Fisher, Alec Baldwin, and Hugh Jackman. And they have to stop this one guy who goes by the name Pitch, who's voiced by Jude Law, who's distilling, I think, fear into these kids' dreams, and he's trying to run it over to a point where he could take over the aspect of fear over children in the world. And I don't know why. Like I sound so confused speaking about this. Yet I know it's supposed to be a simple plot.
Bizarre, yes.
Yeah, it is very bizarre to say the least. But I feel like this trailer does a lot better job than the first one. The first one, I know a lot of people did go crazy for. I wasn't too keen on it, even though the voice casting was terrific. Especially Alec Baldwin lending a Russian accent to the voice of Santa Claus, out of all things. I really dug that aspect more than anything else. This new trailer actually does give away the plot, of course, and I kind of like the direction that it is going to go. I think the voice casting is going to be in its A game yet again, just about every other DreamWorks animated movie is. I think just the way how they execute this plot that they're setting up, which it does sound intriguing, and I think Jude Law does actually lend a decent voice to a villainous character. So, also, I can't believe I was about to forget to say this, but the animation looks stunning. That's something that DreamWorks has always done a great job at. Them and Pixar are, without a doubt, the best at animation in today's movie industry. But what did you think of this new trailer?
I think it kind of gave me the same feeling I got from the first one. It looks different than what DreamWorks has been doing for
looks
the last,
a bit darker, too, a little bit.
I don't think they've done anything like this before. And for that reason, I'm slightly intrigued. They did manage to do what they always do and bring a slew of celebrities to voice the characters, which is good. Like you said, I like Alec Baldwin's Russian accent as Santa Claus. The animation here looks kind of different, too. It almost, with some of the characters, kind of looks semi-creepy. Almost looks like the Robert Zemeckis motion capture, especially with Jack Frost. Just, I guess, maybe it's the way his hair is designed.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from on that.
Yeah. The one takeaway with this trailer is I'm just confused who this movie is targeting, because what I heard is that maybe this is geared toward boys, but, because it's tonally kind of dark for a DreamWorks animation movie, and there's like a lot of action, and there's a lot of fantasy and a lot of magical things, but it centers around all these fantastical storybook figures. Like
I think
Jack
that's
Frost
the real drawing for the
Claus.
kids, too, actually.
That's just that. I think it's going to be a hard sell. I'm intrigued. I'm slightly curious about it. I'm not, it's not up there for me with like some of my most anticipated animated movies for the rest of the year. It looks interesting, and I think that's pretty much what I'll say.
Yeah, like the trailer that was released for Jack Reacher, it is one of those that it is intriguing, but you still don't know entirely how to make out with it for when it's coming out, of course. Like, I think that this does look good, but as you said, you could be right on this movie doesn't quite know what its target audience is, because if you look in parts of the trailer, they have a lot of split demographics around there, whether it's targeting boys, adults, children, because it's jumbling a lot of tones together. However, I really liked how they played it light on the comedy, to say at least. It looks like this could be one of the most mature DreamWorks pictures, even though it's throwing in all these children myth legends and everything, like the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and so forth. Nonetheless, I'll see it, though, because I see every movie that DreamWorks makes, and they hardly ever disappoint with the stuff that they do. So, nonetheless, I'm intrigued still.
Yeah, there are a few moments of comedy in this trailer, though, that I just kind of thought were really bad and forced. I don't know, I can't think of anything specifically, but I just know there are a lot of punchlines that just felt very, very typical. I did like the Russian accent from Alec Baldwin. That might just justify it. But yeah, I don't know exactly if I will go out and see this at this point, but I'm intrigued, and if it gets good reviews and word of mouth, I'll check it out.
Yeah, it seems like we're pretty much on the same level for this one then.
Yep.
All right, so now we move on to the core piece of this show, which is Rate the Release. This last week, I can't say weekend because we had one movie that released very early in the week, and the two movies that we're going to review are Savages, which released on Friday, July 6th, and The Amazing Spider-Man, which released on Tuesday, July 2nd. Now, we're going to start off with Savages, which this is going to be very interesting because we talked earlier about this, and we have totally different thoughts on this movie, something that has not happened on Film Freaks before, so this is a first for all you listeners right here.
History in the making.
Yes. Now, if you do not know what Savages is, it's based on a novel by Don Winslow, which I read about 60 pages of the book or so, and it is very insane, but granted, when I saw the movie, it didn't really mean anything for that matter, because I got to the point where, one of the main characters ends up returning to the main character, to other main characters. I'm talking in circles right now, but just stay with me. And essentially, what I'm translating to, what I read really didn't mean anything to compare it to the movie in essence. But the basic plot in the movie centers on these two best friends, Ben and Chong, who are played by Aaron Johnson and Taylor Kitsch, in which they run a huge marijuana growing business in Laguna Beach, California. And that's until this Mexican drug cartel known as the Baja Cartel has its main advisors come who want to try to forge a business deal with both of them, but they don't want to join with them, and with their respectful decline. However, the cartel's head, who's played by Salma Hayek, doesn't take this too kindly, and they decide to distill fear into them by kidnapping their shared girlfriend, O, played by Blake Lively. And what ensues is not entirely what I expected. I expected this more to be like a revenge action thriller, in which essentially it does have those elements of action in it, but it really is a revenge negotiation thriller, to say the least. However, this is the return to form for director Oliver Stone, who's known for making very controversial movies that have a lot of subliminal messaging in them based on either social, political, economic issues, and so forth of the present day in which the movie setting reverts to. And from the way that this movie looked from the trailer, I was really intrigued because the way that it could be all ballsy, all out, and sometimes pushing the scale of what you can get away with an R rating. But I have to say that after seeing this, granted, I still somewhat enjoyed the movie. I just felt that there was something missing in it, and I can't really pinpoint whether that was an editing or writing mistake, but it just didn't have that wow factor or anything that really propelled it above. To start off with the acting, though, I thought the entire ensemble did a very good job, and I'm even surprised to say that Taylor Kitsch did actually pretty good in this movie, and I've really been slamming him earlier this year for roles in John Carter and Battleship, but I can't really blame him to say least because both those movies had awful scripts in them. But here he actually plays a role that is much more well-suited to his limited acting range. In fact, it falls kind of in the realms of his character Tim Riggins from the TV show Friday Night Lights. And moving on to other very notable performances in this movie, I thought that John Travolta, Benicio del Toro, and Salma Hayek all did terrific performances. Travolta seemed like he was having a blast with the role that he was playing as he was quipping left and right, and his face kind of creeped me out a little bit because it looked like a bobblehead the whole time, and especially
I agree. Yeah, something felt weird.
Yeah, either it was like the face of a doll or something that they somehow pinpointed him on makeup or something, and then his head just would not stop moving throughout. It was distracting me a little bit, but I couldn't help but laugh at the same time.
Yes,
yeah, I know.
Something felt off with his head to body ratio. That was a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, there were parts of his face that would like barely even move at points too sometimes, which granted was odd, but. Moving on from that small off-course track right there, Benicio del Toro was gloriously over the top as the drug cartel's main enforcer. I thought that he did a good job at balancing together both the very dark comedy and also the charisma he had with the characters he interacted with on screen. He was very creepy and slimy, to say the least. And Salma Hayek did a decent job as the villain. Her slimy line delivery really hit hard, but I couldn't really help but laugh because her Spanish accent is so strong in this character that whenever she said the F word on screen, I kind of couldn't help but laugh a little bit because of how strong her accent was when saying that. But Oliver Stone, though, I think this is his return to form in directing. I thought that he made this movie look very good with how bright the color palette was, and Also, the transitions between color and black and white, it's very reminiscent of the way he cut that together in one of my favorite movies of his, Natural Born Killers. This is definitely the return to form that I wanted from him. Just, it didn't completely hit it 100% though, because it didn't really have any controversial to say about the war on drugs, other than the fact that it is a giant anti-drug movie, to say the least, because it shows how two sides cannot get along, and it always leads to violence happening in the end. The big problem I had with this movie was, in addition to the fact that it never had that punch that I wanted out of it, it was the ending. And this is something that a lot of people are going to discuss, because the movie, spoiler alert for you, if you have not seen the movie, this is a small spoiler right here.
Are we spoiling it?
Well, just minorly. We're just going to say that there are two endings to this movie. And that's the furthest that we'll go.
I think we can say it does one of those things where it shows you one thing, but that's not really happened, and it shows you a different version.
Yeah, which granted, I would have felt much better if that first ending did happen, because I thought that it resonated with better and would have closed it on a non-cliche form, kind of. But then they end up pulling the rug out from...
Sorry, I just wanted to add, I don't think, what was the point of having two endings? I just never got that. Why not show us the final ending, like, you know, that's the only one they showed. That's just another thing
Yeah, like, I can't really pinpoint if it was something in the book or it was just something that Oliver Stone wanted to throw into it. That's something that I'll have to do in the future, because I do still want to finish the book, of course, but the way in which they just pull out the rug from you and introduce you to this other ending, I mean, for something for just a regular mainstream audience member, they'll go like, oh yeah, like I wanted that to happen to them. But if you really take it seriously, though, like you were for a while, I wouldn't say too seriously, you just go, why was that even necessary? Like, the more I thought about it, I thought that the ending to this movie, like the second ending, was just such a cop-out, and it just had to make everything so goody two-shoes in the end, which, granted, I was kind of pissed. Like, I wish it ended the other way around, because I would have been just fine with that, but overall, like, the movie, it is very violent at points, and there is a torture scene that is extremely brutal to look at, and I think that it's a mostly entertaining movie. Just, it does have tonal issues, and I forgot to say one sec, the voiceover narration by Blake Lively was very awful, so flat in the line delivery, and it really provided nothing for the film. And I thought a lot about my rating for this movie since I initially rated it. I initially rated this movie a 3.5 out of 5, and in fact, I'm going to have to tell my newspaper editors to change my rating, because that was my rating that I sent in with my written draft for my written review of this movie. So the more I think about that ending and the problems I did with it, I'm going to have to lower my rating to a 3 out of 5. It's a somewhat enjoyable film, just that second ending, Blake Lively's performance and voiceover narration, and also with the tonal shifts here and there that just don't really work with each other. And in addition to the pacing at times, like, it takes a while for it to get going. I just really wish that it could have packed the huge punch that it looked like it was going to do from the trailer.
Yeah, I might be alone on this one, but I hated this movie. And I went in open-minded. I thought this could be kind of a cool, almost anti-summer movie, in the sense that it's not overly, overblown and big special effects heavy, but it really is, in my opinion, overblown, because just this movie felt unnecessarily negative and mean-spirited, and I never say that. It really takes a lot for me to think that, but every character in this movie is annoying, dumb, unlikable, and I'm fine with characters that aren't heroes necessarily, that do kind of evil things, but there's got to be something in the story, or something about the characters that I can latch onto or like. I found all of these characters to be just annoying and horrible to watch on screen. And that style you were talking about, it's, it might be kind of interesting, but I felt like there was just nothing here that it just kind of almost tried to disguise it as, no, this is some edgy, kind of crazy, sexy thriller that's got a lot of saturated colors, and oh, look how hardcore this violence is, and oh, this is super cool with this Blake Lively narration, but it just didn't do anything. It just honestly tried to, it felt like it was kind of dressing up the story like, nope, we're this edgy thriller, but it just kind of is empty. The plot in this movie is barely there. It's kind of interesting the way you described it as like a negotiation revenge movie. That's an interesting way to look at it, but I felt like all of these situations were incredibly dull and uninteresting. and it just sort of kind of wanders around, and there's no like forward momentum, there's no anything, and it sort of wanders and stumbles its way into an ending, which you already kind of got into and we've already sort of described. But this ending is one of the worst, most unsatisfying endings I've seen in a long time.
Now, hold on right there. Would you say it's worse than the Devil Inside's ending?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think this movie, like with Devil Inside, it's a case where that movie, it's like, yeah, of course that's a horrible movie, but this movie had the potential to be somewhat quality. I think this ending offended me more. It pretty much sealed the deal for me with this movie not being good. And there's, all this talk about Oliver Stone, such a controversial, director. He, makes provocative movies. But I think in order to have controversy, you have to have something to say. You have to have a point you're making. And I don't think he's doing that at all in this movie.
Yeah,
go ahead.
The most that I thought that he really tried to at least hint at in this movie was essentially it's an anti-war on drugs movie, but it didn't really have even anything that relevant to perceive into its messaging that I don't even think it had the balls to try to convey in the film. Like, it almost felt non-existent to a fault.
Well, not only that, I don't think anti-war on drugs is that controversial. I mean, I think it's not necessarily like a super provocative thing that he's getting a lot of flack for. I think also with that in mind, the ending to this movie, there's an aspect of it. There's something, I'll just say some characters set up by the end that completely subverts that, and I think goes against that argument. For me, this movie was excruciating to watch. I really did not like watching this movie. I thought the style made it 1,000 times worse, and it was incredibly full of itself and self-indulgent. I really was not a fan of Savages at all.
And what would you give it?
I'm giving it a 1 out of 5, which I was honestly shocked that I disliked it this much.
To be truthful, I was too.
Yeah, I was really shocked walking out of this movie and how mad I was. Because throughout the movie, I just really wasn't enjoying it. I thought I was not invested in any of the characters. I thought the plot, again, like I said, just had no sense of direction. And that ending just completely... That was a seal of approval for me of this movie being just garbage, in my opinion.
Yeah, so there you go. We had vastly different opinions on Savages, though mine has dipped a bit. Like, I at first thought it was pretty enjoyable, but the more I thought about it since I saw it at a screening, my overall rating has dipped a little bit. And frankly, this movie is kind of forgettable, to say the least, the more that I have had my thoughts go over it in certain aspects. And I just wish that it could have really had that punch, because I've been waiting for Oliver Stone to return back to his original directing form that he was so known for. I think he really got only half of it right in this movie, in which he got it right in the style, but in the messaging and going far for anything that he's trying to say or film, like something that you can get away with in an R rating, I just felt like he was really toned down in those aspects, or he just chose to not include them in the film entirely.
Yeah, one other thing I actually forgot to bring up that I wanted to, and I don't know how you felt about this, but you mentioned the R rating, and the violence is incredibly over the top, and also you have Blake Lively is being held captive, and I felt like one of my other big issues with it, and this kind of this is part of the storytelling, is I never felt a realistic sense of stakes, because first off, the violence is just outrageous, but also the Blake Lively, when she is held captive, she's pretty much being treated well, and she constantly complains no, let me talk to the manager of this business. Let me get some better food.
Yeah,
and
I agree on that.
That for me, it's no, you'd be dead if you did that in real life.
You'd be starved to death. They wouldn't even they'd probably offer you water once a day. I mean, getting the treatment of stuff like having pizza and a full-on meal, that would never happen.
No, and it sort of launches off of there, and just for me, that was another aspect that really detracted from me. I just never felt, if Oliver Stone maybe wanted to make this movie kind of a pulpy sort of movie, I think, you needed better characters, and there still has to be some sense of realism in stakes, but to contradict that, if this is supposed to be a controversial, provocative movie about anti-drug war, I don't think you should be going for a weird, pulpy movie. So for me, this whole movie just fell apart, so... I'm done.
Right.
I respect that others enjoyed it, but it really was not my cup of tea.
Yeah, so Savages has definitely split not only us in our opinions, but also with critics as well. It's staying at a 52% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, so it's a halfway return to form for Oliver Stone the more that I think about it, but it really could have been a lot better. So Savages is in theaters right now if you want to see it, and just going with an open mind, that's really the best that we can say for you.
I would say see it just to get an opinion on it, because I'm very curious.
Same.
I've heard some people even love it. I've heard some people like it, didn't love it, and then, I hated it. So it's all over the board.
Yeah, those people loving it, I still don't quite see what they saw what was so great in it.
I don't either.
Yeah, but moving on to a much more optimistic film, and one that we both certainly enjoyed, is the reboot that many people have anticipated and has built up a lot of hype over the years since it went into production, even just the announcement where it received a lot of widespread criticism. That is Marvel's The Amazing Spider-Man. Now, this is the long-awaited reboot, as I said, of the Spider-Man character. It doesn't have anything to do with the Sam Raimi trilogy, and in this version, we have Andrew Garfield starring as Peter Parker / Spider-Man, in which the movie is sort of a retelling of his origins of how his parents left him at such a young age because something happened that he was never quite aware of when he was a child, and he ends up being dropped off at his Uncle Ben and Aunt May's house, where he stays with them for the rest of his life up until high school, until he uncovers a bag that belonged to his dad's, which has files from Oscorp, and which relate to his relationship with Dr. Kirk Connors, played by Rhys Ifans. And this soon leads to his expected origins of where he gets bit by a radioactive spider and develops these powers, in which it involves web shooting, super strength, and so forth, as a lot of you have known in the Spider-Man character. And what Kirk Connors is trying to do, he's trying to find no weakness in humans by developing this serum, which is based off of lizards, in which he tries to use it on himself specifically to regenerate his lost arm, but he overdoses on it, and it turns him into his alter ego known as the Lizard, which is this giant dinosaur-like green monster that's wreaking havoc over the streets of New York City. And Peter Parker must spring into the action as Spider-Man to stop him from using a weapon that will affect the majority of New York City, while at the same time there are these subplots that involve him with his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and also trying to score the love of his life, Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone. So I'm going to let you, Jordan, start off with your thoughts on this. What did you think of The Amazing Spider-Man? Was it a reboot that nailed the point?
It's interesting. I went into this movie, initially, I think like everyone, when I heard the news, they were rebooting Spider-Man, I just thought, why? We just had the other ones. And even as trailers and stuff came out, I still wasn't as pumped for it as, say, other summer movies like The Avengers, or, it wasn't 100% on my radar. But I saw it at midnight on early Tuesday morning, in a packed theater. And it was interesting, too, because I saw this, and director Mark Webb was there. He introduced the movie, and that was pretty awesome. A lot of fans erupted in applause, and it definitely surprised everybody. And I surprisingly really enjoyed The Amazing Spider-Man. And one of the things I think it does so well that I was not expecting is how it builds up its characters. The first half of this movie is pretty much set up. You have Peter Parker in high school kind of developing a romantic relationship with Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone. And I thought they had really great chemistry. And Mark Webb, of course, directed 500 Days of Summer. And the romance in this movie, not surprisingly, it's great, and it's a lot more authentic than I think you usually get in superhero movies, so I was really pleased with that. The other side of the story, you have Peter Parker kind of discovering things about his father. He meets Kirk Connors and kind of gets into this science world, and ultimately also, becomes Spider-Man. So there's a lot of things going on, and I think the best aspect for me is the romance and him becoming Spider-Man. I think after he becomes Spider-Man and has to take on some villains and some tasks, it sort of fell off a little bit for me, and I think the spectacle of the movie wasn't as great as I kind of wanted it to. There's some really good action scenes, especially at pretty much anything that takes place at night in this movie is really great to look at. The way they captured night, they find this really great balance between a somewhat serious movie with grounded characters while also still feeling like a comic book with some kind of goofy elements. And I loved Andrew Garfield in the role of Spider-Man, Peter Parker. Whenever he's Spider-Man, he's kind of funny and sarcastic and kind of has banter with the villains he's about to attack. Whereas when he's Peter Parker, he's kind of a shy guy, and he really plays both sides realistically. Some of the action that didn't work for me were a lot of the daytime fight scenes, particularly one that takes place between the Lizard and Spider-Man. One of them is in a sewer that takes place about halfway through the film, and then another one takes place at Peter Parker's high school. And both of those just felt really CGI heavy, and I know the Lizard is a CGI villain, but it just almost felt like I was watching video game footage, so that kind of took me out of it. And I guess the other complaint I have with the movie is the Lizard as a villain. I don't think he's as developed or as strong as he should be. For one, I think the fact that you have this CGI creature, this CGI thing running around talking, not very menacing at all. Also, you have, I think they don't develop Kirk Connors well enough to where you actually care about the villain. But those are some gripes. I think overall it's a thoroughly entertaining movie with some really great performances, some really great character development aside from the Lizard. And I definitely enjoyed Amazing Spider-Man. I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It's one of my favorite movies of the summer so far.
All right, and now moving on to my thoughts, which I was actually really anticipating this movie because I'm not the biggest fan of the Raimi trilogy when it comes to Spider-Man because I never really bought Tobey Maguire in full form as Peter Parker. He was just too wimpy and whiny at times when he was playing the character, and I really disliked the character of Mary Jane Watson. I think she's without a doubt the biggest backstabbing, nearly emotionless, two-timing bitch in movie history next to Bella Swan from Twilight. It was just ridiculous. I know some people may or may not share my viewpoint of that character in particular, but moving on, I was really looking forward to this. I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man, and I was initially skeptical, of course, when they announced the reboot so soon, even though I said I'm not the biggest fan of Raimi's trilogy, but as I finally saw this, I saw this at midnight as well. I saw it in IMAX 3D as well, which, granted, I was very glad that I saw it in that format as well. And I really, really, really like this movie a lot. It's one of my favorite movies of the year so far, without a doubt. And I think that what really makes this movie, as you said earlier, is the acting, specifically Andrew Garfield, which he is Peter Parker. And it's even better for the fact that he has been a lifelong fanboy of the Spider-Man character itself. And I think that really translated well to his performance, in which he knew what he had to do for just about every scene in the portrayal that he was doing. And then when he's transitioning between the character of Peter Parker and then onto Spider-Man, he makes it feel so real because he can convey several emotions at a time for what his character is going through, and the way that he expressed it on screen was really mesmerizing at times, because if you read the comics, you can even see that he really does look like Peter Parker in certain scenes as well. And nonetheless, this is one of my favorite performances of the year, and it's definitely Garfield's mainstream breakthrough, too. And he just manages to wow me nearly every year so far from the performances that he has given in his career, which, granted, he's got a lot of promise after this movie for sure. And I thought Emma Stone was very good as Gwen Stacy. I really liked how sympathetic she portrayed the character. Actually, sympathetically, she portrayed the character. And I really bought their relationship together. They had very sweet, genuine chemistry. Their relationship is the true heart of this movie. And nothing really felt forced in their relationship at all. Everything just flowed so well in a realistic manner, in which you can buy, yeah, that would happen in a relationship involving two characters like these. In terms of supporting acting, I thought that Martin Sheen did a great job at delivering a very endearing performance as Uncle Ben, which I actually prefer him just over Cliff Robertson's as.
I mentioned him; he was very good as well.
Yeah,
I liked Emma Stone too. I think she's essentially playing Emma Stone, but I think that definitely works in this movie.
Yeah, she's very sweet though too. I think that's what really adds on to the character as well. Now, going back to the Uncle Ben part, I'm gonna hit a minor spoiler for this, but if you have seen the first Spider-Man and this one as well, then it really isn't gonna be that much of one. But the way that they handle the death of Uncle Ben in this one, the actual death itself isn't as hard-hitting as the first Spider-Man film was, but I have to say that the recuperating aspects and its aftermath were handled much better because they managed to develop that for a little while, which kind of surprised me.
Yeah. I agree. I thought that the first one, I think that's a good point. I think the kind of the emotional, the immediate impact you get from that scene is better in the first movie, but I thought that whole sequence, the way it was kind of set up and executed, was really cool in this movie. Like, I didn't exactly know how they were going to handle that, and I thought they did it in a really interesting way.
Yeah, because in the first one, I couldn't really buy it as that, because all that Peter Parker really did afterwards was he shed a tear sitting in his room after the funeral, and that was it. It just cut away. Like, it never really revisited that plot point for a while. But moving back onto this, moving on to supporting cast, Risa Fons did a commendable job as Dr. Kurt Connors, a.k.a. the Lizard. However, as you did say, the character itself, his motivations aren't 100% clear, and they rushed it a little bit towards the end. I do think that the CGI for the Lizard was very well done, in particular, though. And also, I thought that Sally Field did a decent job as Aunt May. Dennis Leary was very in his form in times as the Captain George Stacy, Gwen Stacy's father. And Mark Webb directing this movie surprised the hell out of me, because this is his first big blockbuster movie, and that's a huge step up comparing to the fact that he directed a indie romantic comedy like 500 Days of Summer, which he did express a lot of style in that, and I think he transitioned this further to it, in which he ended up handling the action sequences pretty well, and he really gave it a sense of claustrophobia in some scenes because of how tight some of the shots were edited, and that especially involves a sequence in which there's a part where Spider-Man takes on this whole force towards the end, in which the shots are very tight, but you gain of how small the sense of how small the space is. And Webb has a great opportunity to really work with heart in the movie, and I feel like he's really nailed down that aspect in both the movies he has directed, and he does an even better job in this with the relationship with Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. And the best part about this movie, though, being the fact that I have read a few of the comics and I have also read up character bios and so forth on the internet, the best part about this movie is that it really does feel like a Spider-Man movie much more than the Raimi trilogy was, because it's grounded in this very gritty and dark setting for the stuff that Peter Parker has to go through in the movie, in addition to his past as well. And just everything in this movie flowed so surprisingly well that it won me over from the first 10 minutes or so, from introduction and so forth. I love The Amazing Spider-Man. It's one of my favorite movies of the year, and without doubt the best Spider-Man movie put on screen, because it really gave us the sense of who Peter Parker is and his motivations for what he does throughout the movie. It essentially feels like the comic book, The Amazing Spider-Man brought to screen in about full form as you could imagine, and I really love the movie a lot. I'd almost say this is better than The Avengers, but I'd have to determine that again by seeing The Avengers a third time. But overall, I give The Amazing Spider-Man 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really like the movie, and it knitted down on everything that I want from the movie. A heartfelt relationship, very fun and blockbuster entertainment-esque action sequences, and great acting across the board, and surprisingly smart direction by Mark Webb, in which it really was grounded within the setting and tone of the comics alone. I love the movie.
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely would take The Avengers over it, only because I think with that movie, the characters aren't necessarily as thoroughly developed as the ones here, but that's not really the tone. It's sort of supposed to be this goofy, popcorn movie. And so I think it did deliver on different personalities in The Avengers, and also gave us huge, really awesome spectacle. Here, I think they did a great job with the characters, but the spectacle is kind of what fell short. I wanted to ask you, though, you said you saw this in IMAX 3D. I just saw this in regular 3D. What did you think of it?
Well, in IMAX, it really popped in certain sequences where the sound was very loud, and it really gets you with the bass at times. And that's really the only thing that I really got out of the IMAX itself. But then again, with the massive screen that it was being shown on, I think that really added on to the cinematography element of the film. And in particular, I think you'd agree with this, the 3D pops the most when it deals with the sequences where Spider-Man is using his web shooters and web slinging across New York City. I think those scenes really work the most for that factor alone. Otherwise, besides that, the 3D wasn't as strong in the other scenes, but you really get the sense of it when he is web-slinging, though.
Yeah, definitely, particularly in the final sequence of the film where he's swinging around. That was definitely, I don't know, maybe it was the position I was sitting in, but I thought for most of the movie, other than those scenes, it didn't really do anything. And I even kind of flipped my glasses on and off at certain points, and you could barely tell that it was blurry.
Yeah,
so
yeah, I even did that once too.
A fault for me. So I'd say see it in 2D and you'd be okay.
Now, there's two more things that I want to ask you before we wrap this up right here. The first one being, which score do you prefer more, James Horner's in this one or the Danny Elfman one?
Definitely Danny Elfman. I didn't dislike the score here. I just thought it kind of felt like wallpaper to me, like it was there and it did its job, but I don't think it was very memorable at all. And I couldn't tell you how. I couldn't hum a tune or anything from the score, but I think Danny Elfman's just the way it goes with the opening titles of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, just the way, that opening of the first film, I think is pretty great. So I definitely would go Danny Elfman.
You see, that's where I would disagree a bit because I thought in the original movies, I think that Danny Elfman netted down just about as perfect of a theme as you could for a character like Spider-Man. However, the music itself that followed, for some reason, it didn't completely click with me. James Horner's in this version. Of course, the theme itself isn't as strong as Elfman's, but I feel like the score worked with a lot of the scenes within conveying the kind of emotion that it was exhibiting on screen. Specifically, there's this piece that is set during a crane sequence towards the end of the movie, and I feel like that really got me pumped for the way that it was built up. But also in the emotional scenes as well, I thought it clicked well, especially towards the end of the film. So I'd slightly prefer Horner's more over Elfman, but that moves on to the second and last question I have for you. Where would you rank this in between the Raimi movies?
I think I would have to see the Raimi movies again because it's been a while. This is definitely better than Spider-Man 3.
Oh yeah, I think everybody can agree with that right there.
Yeah, I think I like it better than the first Spider-Man. Again, it's been a while. I think I still hold Spider-Man 2 as my favorite, but I think a rewatch is due for all three of them. But this is definitely toward the top. Definitely, I'd say probably a second place behind Spider-Man 2.
Yeah, for me, I'd rank it above all the rest of the Raimi movies. Granted, in respect to the Raimi movies, we're disregarding the third one. I think the first one is decent. The cheese factor does get on me a little bit, though. And then in the second one, I thought was more of an improvement over the first one. Just once again, the cheese factor and also the character of MJ kind of got on my nerves a bit in it. But for me, I would rank The Amazing Spider-Man above the Raimi trilogy alone. Granted, this is within respect to everyone who has seen the Spider-Man movies. I think that's pretty much how the way it has been playing out as well, because it seems like people have either loved it so much that they'd rank it above, or that there are fans that still have the most respect for the second one, and they'd rank this one just below. So it seems like that's kind of the pattern that's been taken on for the rankings.
There you go.
So, yeah. Amazing Spider-Man is in theaters in regular aspect, 3D and IMAX 3D. You can check it out. It's still making a lot of money at the box office. It's about to eclipse $100 million already, if I'm correct. So
yeah, I think that Tuesday opening was a big help.
Yeah, even if it did release late in the weekend, I feel like it would have pulled in a lot more big numbers, but it already did beat one record in its Tuesday, in which it pulled in the highest Tuesday opening than any other movie.
Yeah, I'm honestly surprised how well it's doing. I was expecting it to do pretty well, and I was expecting it to do be number one at the box office just because it's Spider-Man. But the amount of money it's making, the fact that it's already gotten to $100 million, is pretty crazy.
Yeah, so, it deserves it though.
It's well deserved. So.
Yeah, it is. All right, well, that does it for this episode of the Film Freaks podcast. And so, Jordan, where can we find you in the social network sphere?
Yeah, thank you first off, Tyler, for having me on again.
Oh, you're very welcome.
A lot of fun. You've been on the Movie Files podcast a lot, so this is a nice change.
Yeah, it was.
You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Rowenet, Rowenet. I do YouTube movie reviews. I put that's where you can find the Movie Files podcast. At least new episodes you can find. It's a weekly movie show where I, similar to Tyler, have a YouTube critic on as a guest every week, and we review movies, lots of trailers. It's a very similar setup to this show, and we have a lot of fun. Tyler's been on there a few times, and it's been great. You can follow me on Twitter at RownetReview, ROWENET, and the word review. And you can find me on my blog at rowenet.wordpress.com, ROWENET.wordpress.com. I haven't written on there in a while, but when I do written movie reviews and box office reports and anything I feel like writing about. So, yep.
All right, and then you can find me, of course, under youtube.com/CaliCriticReviews. I'm pretty sure if you're listening to this show, you pretty much already watched that, I'm reckoning. And you can also follow me on Twitter, @CaliCritic. You can find me on Facebook, Tyler Christian, and then in parentheses, CaliCriticReviews. The first letter in each of those three words is capitalized if you want to find that. And then you can also find me on my website, CaliCriticsCorner.blogspot.com. I'm trying my best to get back into the thick of writing something every week. My most recent post was a written review of Magic Mike last week. I didn't do a on-camera review of that because I didn't have the time to, but if you want to still hear my thoughts on that, you can also find the last episode of Film Freaks, which I did with Cacman11, which I gave my review in that, and you can also read the review if you wish to. On next week's show, it's going to be a little bit later than usual because we're not going to be reviewing any movies in the next episode because I'll be going to San Diego Comic-Con next week, and that leads to the guest that I will have on the special episode of next week, which will be a Comic-Con recap one. I will be doing with Charlie Morse of Not Charles Morse, so you can look forward to that in the future. So,
my co-host on the Movie Files podcast.
Yes, he is the co-host of Jordan's podcast, the Movie Files podcast. So you can look forward to me and Charlie breaking down what we experienced at Comic-Con in the next week and a half or so. So you can look forward to that in the future. And otherwise, in the meantime, I'm Tyler from CaliCriticReviews.
I'm Jordan.
And we will see you next time on the Film Freaks podcast. Goodbye.